Hi, I'm Estefano Ramirez, co-founder of Tonsma and host of the Web3 Growth Podcast, and welcome to our second podcast episode, where we'll discuss how to market blockchain games during a bear market. And today we have Baz Furby, who's the CMO at Disruption X and the host of Decentralize. Baz comes from Web2, I believe, and you have extensive experience in marketing sales and particularly e-commerce. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. 12 years in the e-commerce space before stepping across into the dark world of Web3. And yeah, a lot of that was working with big global brands, big retailers, and helping them engage with their customers, find new customers, drive loyalty, all of that kind of stuff from a marketing perspective in the e-commerce world. And I stepped across because I saw NFTs as the future of commerce, which was the link. 3-4 years ago, started consulting on a few projects, and then, as you mentioned, I've been CMO over a couple of games, and now working in a gaming infrastructure project called Disruption X. So, kind of stepped across from that e-commerce world, thinking about transactions and that kind of thing, into the more gaming end of Web3, really.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity in terms of innovation for e-commerce and just blockchain in general. Seeing one of the things that I really like about blockchain is, as a marketer myself, is the fact that you can view who your holders are and what other tokens they hold and how often they transact with blockchain and that sort of thing. And it's something that people don't really use often, which surprises me. But yeah, tell us a little bit then about Disruption X and what Decentralize is about.
Yeah, so Disruption X, we're a Web3 gaming infrastructure project, and we're essentially building the tools to help games integrate into Web3. One of the things we looked at when we looked at those set of tools really is that we're really narrowing down on the challenge around generating revenue for games. Because what we discovered is a lot of games are launching, they might be able to plug themselves into Web3, they might be able to do an NFT launch, but then they struggle with an ongoing revenue stream to help maintain their business, which is a necessity, in this world. So one of our core offerings is something called a tournament system that allows, multiplayer games to take place. You lock maybe a few dollars into a smart contract, and then the winner takes the winnings. And the idea is that we can organize, tournaments up to 100 users. People could put a few dollars in each, and then the winner gets a few $100 to, the end of that day or the end of that series of events. And we take a small fee and share that with the developers of the game. So you've got that revenue stream. Imagine thousands of games taking place every day, and then just a small number of pennies being taken from each game contributes towards their bottom line. So really going after that integration of the Web3 element, but also the revenue streams, and help those game companies, generate revenue and make money.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool idea by the sounds of it. And like you said, think about all the sort of multiplayer games that happen online, and I guess people could just wager, especially when with not even like big content creators around video games, but like just content creators in general that stream on Twitch, for example, and they have somewhat of a following. They could use something like this, couldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. You could even host their own tournaments and get a slice of the pie. There's all different options once we get down that route, and I think it feeds really nicely into that just competitive element of gaming, which is something that as a gamer, growing up, I was really hooked into myself. I love FIFA and N64, Mario Kart, all that kind of stuff. It was all the kind of fun end of competitive gaming, and I think there's huge potential there, especially with esports coming in, which is a whole nother
Absolutely.
podcast and a whole nother topic that I'm sure we could deep dive. But
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting space.
And maybe tell us a little bit about decentralized, and then we'll get into the topics.
Yeah, so decentralized. I think the idea originally came from a tweet when I was thinking about how do we bring the next 500 million users to crypto. And really, what I wanted to discover through podcasts is meeting founders, other projects, other marketers in the space, is really start to think about how we uncover, those other users. What are the use cases? What does the marketing look like? What does the technology evolve into? All of those things. So it's just an opportunity for me to go and ask questions to great people in the space, to be honest. And like yourself, a few episodes in, having some really good conversations, and looking forward to what else we cover.
Yeah, podcasting it's a great thing to, especially for someone that wants to learn more and wants to like dive deep into different industries and stuff like that. So I guess this is the reason why I've created the growth podcast, the Web3 growth podcast. But yeah, so let's talk about maybe the elephant in the room, or should I say the bear in the room. So we're fully in a bear market, and we're seeing Web3 games struggle to acquire players. In fact, I read an article today that said that there's been a reduction in net new players of like around 30% for blockchain gaming. What do you think people are doing wrong, and why are we seeing such a decline in game and users, I guess?
Yeah, I think I did a bit of browsing before this as well when we were talking about the questions, and I did look at some of the Ethereum data just around like on-chain usage and number of users. And at the peak when some of those big events were happening last year, even before that, I guess before all the collapses of things that happened in 2022, some of the peak day activity, there was like 1 million users on Ethereum active. And some of the days like this week, it's been 200,000. So the reality is we've got 1/5 of the number of people around doing stuff. And that's really just because of the fallout of the market, right? So I don't think anyone can be held accountable for doing anything wrong in this market. There is just the reality that there's a lot less people in crypto in the Web3 space. And it's our job to try and kind of bring those people back and bring confidence back to the market and, face some of the challenges that 2022 showed us around authenticity and trust and building up the protocols again. But really interested in terms of like, Web3 games specifically, I guess there's two target markets, right? We've either got transition of people across from the Web2 gaming market, which are gamers that are, arguably interested or savvy enough to think that they might switch across to Web3 gaming. They might be curious, I think is probably the right word. And then the other is converting people that are already Web3 savvy that might have bought an NFT before but maybe not played Web3 games, or they might hold some Ethereum or some Bitcoin and be interested in what the gaming side of things can bring. So I would say there's like that Web2 transition type of profile, and then you got the Web3 native that might be playing games elsewhere. They might not even know about this particular game, and therefore we might be able to bring them across. And I think they're the two audiences that we should be going after. One focused on education, and one focused, I guess, on like acquisition.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think obviously because the market has not been friendly, then I guess there are a lot less eyes in the market and therefore a lot less attention. But I think blockchain games have a particular sort of unique situation where you might not necessarily need to target people based on the blockchain jargon and instead target people based on the fun of the game. So for example, a good example is like, so Vemp are building a game like a Clash of Clans blockchain game, but it's themed towards the Arabian hero Antara. Now the way we're thinking about marketing this game, especially in the current bear market, is, you said there's two different personas. There is the Web3 native who understands what blockchain is and definitely believes and wants blockchain games to progress, and that sort of person is a lot I guess they're a lot easier to target because the sort of competition for that is relatively low. If you compare it to the Web2 persona, let's call it, it's a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive, in fact, to target those people, because the way you market to those sort of people, you're in direct competition with the Clash of Clans, the big games.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously those big games have bigger pockets than us. So therefore more budget and stuff like that. So you kind of like, yeah, you really need to think about how you're, I guess, targeting your marketing and your offering. So yeah, and I think another thing that just came to my mind now is thinking of, and I guess this does depend on your unique situation, but I guess there is like a third persona that I just briefly thought of right now, and those are the people who believe in games, who believe in blockchain. They might not be gamers themselves, but they want to invest in gaming. Now, this is maybe a bit of a, like, not a dangerous person to target, but something that you have to think about, because obviously you don't want to target people that just want to pump and dump your token. And obviously this depends if you do have a token or not. And I think it also depends on whether you rely on your token for either raising funds to develop the game or for anything else. But yeah, it could be like someone who lurks in the background and just wants to, get involved somehow, but doesn't want to play games or whatever. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I definitely know where you're going with that one, because in that Web3 world, I think just the reality of projects that have tokens is we are we're not only acquiring, or we're not only looking to acquire players to play the game, but of course, naturally we are also marketing to a retail investor audience.
Mm.
And that's that third persona, isn't it? Might not even play the game, but they are a valuable contributor to the ecosystem. If they, speculatively buy the token, hold on to it, maybe stake it, they might hold the NFTs because they buy into the project,
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely that Web3 user there as well. That's maybe not a player, but is an investor.
Yeah, and like I said, I think you need to like think carefully about that one, because you don't want the pumps and dumps, the people who just are there for the speculation. So yeah,
Although you do kind of need some. You need some of them to drive the
yeah,
adoption, drive
yeah,
the hype. But
yeah, you do. And I guess it does really depend on your situation, because if you're relying on how you're raising funds and stuff, because if you're, for example, raising and you've got, you've been funded, I guess maybe the token shouldn't be trying to raise funds from the token shouldn't be such like the main focus, if you see what I mean. But if you're struggling to raise maybe, and you're looking for the token as a way of raising funds, then obviously you need those guys, I guess.
yeah.
But yeah, as someone this takes me to my next question is, as someone who's currently raising, what are your suggestions for founders that are looking to secure funding, especially in a bear market?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's topical because it's something we're right in the middle of at the moment. We received some super early funding from one of the guilds that's a guild partner of ours, and then we're going out for a Series A at the moment. And one of the challenges of this market, of course, is that valuations are lower and a greater level of diligence is required, especially if, some of the things that happened with FTX. And what it's really caused us to go deep on is to really start to understand our why, which is why when I introduced the project at the beginning, I didn't just say we're a Web3 infrastructure project that helps you plug into the blockchain. That's one thing. But the reason that we have a why is we're really narrowed down and focused in on this tournament system. And that is tailored to a challenge that our target customer really has. So I'd say what we've been through the exercise and what it's kind of been, the way that we've come out of this stronger is that we've now got a better understanding of what our why is and what our product really is compared to some of the other competitors that which are, in this space, because there's a lot of businesses going after the same audience or, with similar positioning. And I think our opportunity to kind of spend a little bit more time going deep into that why has uncovered what, the solution, and we've started to develop more in that direction. So going deep on that, almost the pitch deck structure, right? A good pitch deck is your introduction, your challenges, and then how you meet them. And we went over that 100 times. And as we went through and, version 10 of the deck and version 20 of the deck, they just got stronger and stronger. And I think got us into a much better place. So yeah, it feels like sometimes you're spinning your wheels in that part, in that time spent, but you do definitely come out stronger having, gone through that process. So yeah, really getting to the bottom of the why and then articulating that as clearly as possible is probably the kind of core piece of advice I would give.
Yeah, I think you've sort of nailed it there. As someone, so I work through Vemp Group, and I've attended a few VC calls to do some due diligence and stuff. And yeah, I am surprised by how some people don't have their why. Why are you building this? So they focus more on the features of the product and more on this, but they don't really focus on like the bigger picture, the why.
Yeah.
So
There's a lot of very technical crypto projects as well, which no doubt have incredible technology, but they don't do a very good job of articulating their market fit, their challenges, and even sometimes their business model. And things like if you just wanted to start a new building company, you would go and get a bank loan and you would have to do a business case and all of those things that tend to get forgotten when you build technology. And especially, a lot of projects I've seen have gone to VCs and they haven't thought about, what their business model is and how they generate fees going forward. So really going through all of that, like business school 101, is really important. It's there for a reason.
Yeah, it's honestly the amount I've been pitched to a lot, and I see so many models where they just rely on the token as a revenue source, and it's like it's the worst thing you can do because it's not sustainable whatsoever. But yeah, that's another thing that obviously you need to be clear about is where your revenue is coming from and how like that's distributed throughout the different parts of the protocol and stuff like that.
For sure.
But going on to community, do you think whilst you secure funding, do you think it makes sense to build a community, or do you think it depends on the protocol?
I think it's a very yes or no dependent question. Personally, for our project, we decided that during our first actually 11 months in reality, we're focused on building the product and not having the distraction of a community getting excited by a product that's still a year away. And we made a very conscious decision to stay stealth, focus on the build. Our traction is the development of our product versus other projects that might have traction through a big community, but maybe not the funding or the development work behind the scenes to actually build the product. And I think that expectation setting and decision making is really important. So yeah, I think there's different approaches to it, but I think for sure, having set the right expectations with your community, if you're building a community, is probably the most important thing. Nothing worse, nothing kills a project more than misset expectations, and that can just scare people right off. So I think that's really important. Is if you are going early and building that community, it is probably an asset to you to have that community for sure. We might be stronger having done that earlier, but I think as long as you've got the right expectations and you're having the right conversations with that community and nurturing them in the right way, then I think it's fine. And then I think, probably just having a good strategy around building up to that launch. So what are the big steps in your journey? When does an NFT drop? What does an IDO look like? When does the game and what does beta access look like? All of these things need to be planned out, and then you can build your community plan around that. Personally, for us, because we're infrastructure, we just felt it was more of a B2B functionality that we're building, and therefore we probably don't need too many people hyped up about our SDK right now. So yeah, decision based on the business, I think, is probably the right approach. And
yeah, I think I agree with that. I actually think that some protocols don't even need a community, like especially if you're building something like what you're building, which is like a business to business thing. You might not necessarily need a community for it to function, but you'll definitely need sort of obviously users in the future and that sort of thing. But as you build it, you might not, like you said, it's a distraction at the moment. But you can take it the opposite way and say, if you could use a community to sort of help you develop the product with community feedback and stuff like that. And I mean, it depends on your approach on it. If you want to go fully decentralized and get community feedback and stuff like that, but we all know that takes ages and that could be quite detrimental.
I won't name the project, but I was talking to a guy the other day that's founder of it's actually an infrastructure project, but in a slightly different space. And they've done no marketing. They've raised no money from VCs. They haven't even thought about community and all of those things, but they're building a product. They've got an MVP behind the scenes built. And through sales and partnerships, they've already got their first 250K of recurring revenue sold.
Oh, wow.
So they've done no marketing. They've just focused on sales and building the product. And they've got two or three kind of high ticket customers. And now they've got recurring revenue in the kind of, signed and sealed. So actually, they probably don't need to go out to market, or if they do, they go out to the VCs with a really solid foundation in their revenue because they're business to business technology and they've already sold it to some people.
Absolutely.
And I think that's another really smart route to market, where it just shows that sometimes, we're marketers, but sometimes there's other routes to market which are actually, really fast for gathering traction.
Yeah, that's actually like if you show, especially these guys, if they've proven that the concept works and they're getting revenue, I'm pretty sure you would jump all over that.
Can raise as much money as they want, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, continuing on for like community stuff, how so it's very complicated to gather your first set of community members. How at what stage should people think about building a community when it comes to the game? Is it do you plan, like you said, you plan in accordance to your roadmap of when you're releasing your beta and stuff like that, or do you just do it right from the beginning and sort of like build up hype that way? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's important to first map out what the journeys are, what the journey is, what events are happening in the lead up to the launch. And I've seen businesses taking all different approaches. Some have done the kind of slow, should we say, 6 to 9 months of building a community up, and then eventually doing something like an NFT drop, and then, you know, another 9 months, you know, launching the game. There's things like Illuvium that we've known about for feels like years before they eventually launch a product. And they've done the kind of quite expensive marketing route of building a huge community around this big project. I've seen other projects that have just appeared on the scene out of nowhere. They've done a free NFT drop and built a community of 50,000 people in a month. And then, you know, 2 months later, they got a game in the market, and they've just done that kind of like snap into the market approach. And I find those really exciting. I kind of, I look at them in awe of how they've built these, you know, communities so quick and got the right excitement. And I think that's really smart. It's almost like the one end you've got like the enterprise business that, you know, has a strategy and the structure and the kind of slow burn up to the size and scale that they want to be. And then the other end you've got like the savvy market, you know, kind of new entrant into the market, and somehow they just appear and do all that fantastic stuff. So I probably need to learn more about how they just appear on the market like that. I find that really interesting in this space.
I think for those particular guys, you have. I think if you have a good product, I think that definitely helps. I mean, ChatGPT is an example of it. Might obviously it is in a blockchain game, but it's an example of like they launched and within the month they got like what 5 million or 50 million users or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's because of the product. The product. I'm not sure if you use ChatGPT in your current day to day, but I use it almost every day, even for personal stuff. Like I go into New York on Thursday just as, you know, to visit with my girlfriend, and we use ChatGPT to plan our trip, and it gave us exactly, like, we told it exactly how many days we have, what we want to do, what we want to visit, and like how much we want to spend, and it just gave me a very detailed sort of itinerary of where to go and where to take the best pictures and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, and it's crazy. And when you have a good product like that, I think it's a lot easier to get that explosion of users. I think another thing as well is how you leverage your own personal connections and partnerships. So say for example, I read this case study online of this lady. She's also a CMO, but she had some really good connections. I think it was one of the big Ethereum NFT projects, and she managed to get this new blockchain game, just like hundreds of thousands of users within the first few weeks, simply because they announced a partnership with the right people.
Yeah.
So I think that's another good way of going about it. But yeah, and how, like, do you have any growth hacking tactics for acquiring new members? Sorry.
Yeah, I think this is where Web3 gets really interesting, because I think you mentioned earlier, you know, Web2 you typically have your CRM, you maybe have Twitter followers and an email database, and then in Web3 there's all these new things that are cropping up. So I've been speaking to a few partners that are signed and businesses that we're working with recently. One that I think is an emerging trend that I think will really take off. I think you might have spoken to them as well, but it's an affiliate networking program where they essentially have a network of publishers, and then they can drive traffic down into drive NFT sales. And one of the things I've been talking to them about more recently is I'm advising a DeFi protocol, and obviously I'm building Web3 gaming infrastructure, and talking to them about how they could potentially adapt their technology to drive adoption into a platform instead of an NFT sale. And therefore they could potentially get a percentage of the fees that people pay on my platform for the first 6 months. So scenarios like that, where there's like, they'll drive the activity and then it can be verified on chain and then they can pay a commission, I think is super interesting. So it's like Web3 affiliate marketing, and an evolution of how they originally thought it would work for NFT drops and then using it for other things. I think that's really interesting. I did an NFT drop with a project middle of last year. It was a free mint. But one of the things that we did is we targeted and dropped, like an airdropped an NFT into the wallet holders, into the wallets of people that hold projects that we had kind of aspired to be like. And it was like a small advertisement into their wallet. So, you know, hopefully they would check their wallet, they would see, oh, I just received this thing, what is it? Take a look. And it was obviously like some type of advert, and it was saying like, come and check out our project. And I think some of these things where you can start to see that on-chain data, and you could target all the players of Axie Infinity or Shatterline or whatever it might be, and drop them a ticket entry into a tournament or a ticket entry into a competition to win an NFT so they can play the game. And all of these things that are slightly more kind of Web3 orientated guerrilla marketing tactics. I actually think what will work the best has not been discovered yet. And I think all these things are like trials, and they might work for a few weeks or months, and then they'll probably be the next thing. But I love all that stuff because it's fun and exciting, and you could just do something that gets you the leg up with, some creative thinking and some nice ideas.
Yeah, I think so. On what you said about the affiliate network, I think so. The name is Affy Network, I believe.
Right, too.
And they're currently still building it, but we are going to start using that with some of our clients fairly soon, as soon as they launch it, because it is a really decent concept. But on the topic of finding creative ways of engaging with people, yeah, I don't think there is a playbook that's been like set on how to engage with the right people, how to engage with them. I don't think we'll find anything until crypto is viewed as it's viewed as a serious thing. Not at the moment, I feel like it's viewed by, not obviously by us, but by the wider public as a scam, obviously. Once crypto moves away from that, I believe sort of playbooks and stuff will start to be cemented and stuff like that. But one of the tactics that I've used for various protocols that works quite well is grabbing sort of a few accounts from, let's say, for example, like a few Reddit accounts, and going to topics that relate to whatever your game is about, and sort of start shilling your project that way. But you need to know how to shill the project, because you don't want to look like a spammer or someone like a bot. And I feel like that's worked quite well for getting your first few, like at least 1,000 community members or 1,000 users. So yeah, that's another interesting way of looking at it. I really liked your idea actually about airdropping. Like it is a free advertisement at the end of the day.
It's one of those things that can come across, and I think initially will come across as quite kind of guerrilla. I think eventually when everyone starts doing it, it will start to look like spam. It's a bit like push notifications. They were incredible in the e-commerce world when they launched, and now every time I get one, I'm like, F off. So those things worked really well for a period of time, and then they eventually they move on. And I think Web3 marketing is the same. There's new things that will just develop and work great for a few months, for a few campaigns, and then everyone will copy and it will stop working again.
Yeah, I feel like it also depends on what your project is about as well. So if you have like an NFT collection related to clothing, maybe, then I feel like mixing up an in real life event with NFTs would be a good way of acquiring community members. But specifically towards blockchain gaming, you could even gamify the experience of one of the things that I see working quite well is building up your own influencer account. So you build up a persona, an actual, not like an animated persona, but a real life person. So there's this NFT collection called the Saudis and the Dev, and they've built their own in real life character. And the way they've gone about it is using humor and crypto culture as a way of building up this persona, and it's worked for them really, really well. And I think it could work for any project, as long as you make sure that you keep to the culture and you keep to it. You have to make sure it's funny. They collaborated with ZZ on some videos as well. So yeah, I think that's a good way of doing that. But then again, it's quite expensive because you need your production team and this, that, and the other, and you need to be quite clever about it. So you've gathered all these community members. How do you retain them? One of the things that I often see people making the mistake of is taking the community for granted and completely like neglecting their community to the point that they don't show up to the chat anymore, and they don't do the usual stuff to check in with their community. How do you retain community members?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think a lot of projects have kind of died off a little bit in terms of their activity in the bear market, and I think that's just unfortunately to do with like cost and retaining their staff and paying their staff and all of those types of things. It's just the reality of startups, right? So a lot of these projects have faded away a little bit on the community side. But I think I said earlier, like expectation management and keeping users engaged is obviously like fundamental to the project. the worst thing you can do is kill off the community, and getting a second wave of life activity is a really like tough objective to have to go through. So I think keeping that community engaged around your roadmap, your development work, giving them a reason to stick around, and not selling the dream, because I think there's too much hype around like selling the dream, but selling them on what this project can be and what ambitions we have is really important. And I think if you can get your first few hundred, raving fans that talk about you when you're not in the room, I think is a really good way of describing it. So these are the people that create their own content, maybe do a YouTube review of your project. They're always retweeting your content. They're probably shilling you when you don't ask them to, and all of those types of things. We need to build these people, and have a few hundred turns into a few hundred, turns into a few thousand, and then you've got a really like solid community around. And I think a lot of the ways to do that is rewarding them, telling them where you are, what you're up to. I think they call it proof of work when they're demonstrating the work that's being done, showing the code, providing access to like game trailers and all of those types of things. Just really kind of keep the community excited and alive around what you're building. So there's a lot to unpack in there, but I think it's just that continual engagement and focus on what we're building together.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's so you have to have like a constant stream of engagement points. And what I mean by that is, especially for blockchain games, it's the perfect way of, so if you're building a blockchain game, use your own game to create community events, create tournaments, or, whatever is relevant to your game. Or if you're still building your game, find other games to engage on. At the end of the day, you're building like a community of gamers, so therefore they like to game. One of the things that we've tried with Vemp is engaging with a community in the metaverse. So we have an experience in the sandbox, and we held quite a big party actually. I think over 100 people attended and over 200 on Twitter Spaces. Half of that converted into the sandbox. And yeah, it was pretty cool. Like it genuinely felt like it was a really cool experience. It would have been better if we all had VR headsets and that sort of thing. But no, yeah, the community loved it, and it was a success. I think another thing, and a very easy way of engaging with your community, is by, and obviously this depends on you have it on Discord or on Telegram. Some people have it on both, for example, Vemp. We use Discord for our gaming audience specifically, and we separate our gaming audience from our, let's call them, investment audience. We keep those guys on Telegram, and the way we keep them engaged is totally different. So for the Discord, we have like live streams of games. I think we live stream almost every day now, but we have different games. We have Big Time, I think another one called Undead Blocks, and just loads of other different types of categories of games to, to build up the audience and to show people new games and that sort of thing. And as for the Telegram, the community on Telegram is very different. They like to speak about what's going on with the market, crypto news and stuff like that. And so every Friday at between 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. UK time, you'll find us doing like a community voice chat on Telegram, and it's something that the community really loves. And it's a like lower hanging fruit type of activity, because it's only thing you need to do is just set up a an event on Telegram, and you show your face and you just chat about what's happened in crypto during that week, and people love that. It's a way for them to actually engage with the founders and the team of the project. So
yeah, there's a lot to be said for kind of showing up. I know a lot of people like to be anonymous, and there's projects that kind of thrive on that. Well, that's like DJing culture of not knowing who the people are. I know that's one approach to it, but I think also a lot of projects, especially when you're putting your hard-earned money into an investment to buy a token, and speculate. I think people like to see a face and know an audience, and meet the team, and they like to hear from a CMO about what marketing activity is planned for the year, coming up, and they like to hear from the CTO about the tech that they're building and some of the intricacies of how it all works. Like all of these things are just add credibility to the project. So yeah, these town hall ideas, and we used to call it an all hands on a Friday for one of the projects that I was working on, and doing that every week just consolidates that relationship really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been thinking about gamifying it in some sort of way, maybe hosting tournaments of something, but it's just having fun with the community, isn't it? So yeah, I'm going to ask you now a question around PR and blockchain gaming. Is it something that's necessary, do you think? Is it useful? or not really?
I think PR is still necessary at the right time. I would say where I am with my project right now, there's no point spending the money, time, getting the message out about something that's I can't get my hands on, or I can't invest in right now, and I can't use tomorrow. I think that it plays an element in community building, and I think it plays an element in user acquisition, especially if you think gaming and you maybe got a game that's got like a Web 2 element, or like a low barrier to entry from a technical perspective, and then you could do like mainstream gaming PR, and you might attract people across to it that are just, what did I say, are curious enough to come and play. So I think that it definitely does play a role in that community building and customer acquisition element. I think the PR agencies, in crypto are making good money for keeping it going. But I think to some degree, it's a necessary evil to still be in that space.
Yeah, I have a little bit of a different take. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's somewhat similar. I think it's definitely a necessary evil. But I speak to people and projects all the time, and the amount of budget they allocate to PR is insane. And I can understand why, because obviously these crypto PR agencies, they want to get paid. So they end up allocating quite a lot of money to press releases and stuff. But even then, I feel like that money is better spent elsewhere, either on growth hacking campaigns or something else like that. We've certainly, like at Vamp, we've spent so much money on PR. We've been on Forbes, on Yahoo, on Cointelegraph, you name it. We've been everywhere. And the community gets a buzz from it. Don't get me wrong. They say, oh wow, like where Yahoo are covering us. Or the best thing is when we don't even mention anything, and a community member just like scrolls on the Twitter and they see, oh guys, look, we've been here. And I think for that it's pretty cool. But even then, I wouldn't be able to justify spending 60K on a PR campaign. Yeah,
I think it depends where the project is as well, doesn't it? It depends on the size and scale, depends on the budget. If we were blessed to be sitting on a project that has a $10 million marketing budget this year, I'm sure a big chunk would go towards making sure that we're in all of those places. The reality is the massive majority of crypto projects are much, much smaller in size and scale at this point in time. So yeah, there's a few road hogs that have got all of the budget and spending all the money and being visible in all those places.
So let's talk about partnerships now. So how do you pursue and acquire lucrative partnerships, and how do you go about thinking about looking for partnerships? Because in crypto, everyone's a partner. Everyone's doing partner with this, and when you like look into it, it's just a co-marketing campaign. It's not really a partnership. Yeah. So how do you stand out with partners and partnerships?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think part of partnerships is just like you say, co-marketing hype. It's because you want to share the following, and there'll be one that's slightly bigger and one that's slightly smaller, and the smaller one's hoping they get some of the followers across, and just part of the game, right? We're all just trying to be savvy and get some exposure. So I think there's an element of partnerships which is there. We've actually got a business development team who are focused on partnerships, and we've got a strategy around who we're going after and why. And we've broken them down into what we consider to be technology partners. And technology partners are things that we could integrate into our solution or connect up that are going to add to the customer experience. And they are, they are things like, Venly is a great one, because they've got social sign-on, they can help you attract more users more easily. And, that's like a good technical partner. There's other things like Ready Player Me, which would be a good technical partner where, you can build and use their avatar system, and then you can get an NFT kind of cross-game avatar. Some really cool stuff, which are like technical partners that add to the ecosystem. So I think that's valuable. And then the others are customers. They're partners, but they're also customers. So we're obviously going after games that are going to use our SDK to plug into the blockchain and use the tournament system. So I would consider those to be partners, but they're also they're really customers, right? And that's why we've got a sales team dedicated to those types of partnerships as well. And then there's community partners, I would say, which is more what we were talking about at the beginning, which is guilds and other communities in the space, maybe other games that we could kind of be friends with. And ultimately they're just their relationship building co-marketing efforts to try and get the word out there. But I think the first two are where we spend our time which is, improving the experience of the product and, ultimately securing people that are ultimately customers.
Yeah, I really like the way you're going about it. Like, not just going after the big name because it's a big name, but actually thinking, okay, how does this project integrate within my product or my project, and how could it be beneficial to my community or to my users, and how can I be beneficial to that product's users, and so on.
Yeah, I
Essentially,
probably missed one in there as well. Actually, obviously there's the blockchains themselves, right? I think if you're fortunate enough to be on the BSC or on Polygon, and then you can actually get a relationship with those chains, ultimately you can get quite a lot of support. And I've worked quite closely with Phantom in the past, and they were fantastic, really supporting the projects on their chain. I know Polygon has got a massive drive on gaming, and they're really supportive with Polygon Studios gaming side. So I think, yeah, there's probably that element as well, which you consider to be a partnership, but like a really strategic partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about KOLs now and user-generated content. So first of all, how important are KOLs? And I honestly believe they're important. Obviously, they play a big part in any campaign, but I feel like projects and Web3 games themselves aren't being targeted enough with the KOLs. They just go for, the big names and spend big money, when in reality I would go for the lower tier guys that specifically focus on blockchain gaming, either by chain or by game category. But yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they're, I don't want to call them the necessary evil again, because we said that with PR, but I think it is part of the marketing mix. It's a great way, if done right, to get access to an audience. And there are, like you say, some huge names in the industry which have millions of following, where arguably, it's worth the exposure. And then I think there are kind of niching down. There are more specific, smaller audiences where you get more bang for your buck, because they might have 100,000 following, but it's 90,000 real people, and they all kind of buy into that person and hang on every word that they say. I found some really good kind of like Phantom specific influencers that have just done really good stuff, and we've done some work with them, and you literally see the token price flying up. Like, there's some really good access that you can get through quite kind of niching down. I think there's the other side to it as well, which is just like, some of these influencers are not even real people. They're just bot behavior, and you're just buying into the mechanisms they've got working behind the scenes. And it's really hard to tell sometimes, what's real and what's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for me, so when it comes to blockchain gaming specifically, we have quite a large roster of KOLs that we like to work with. But what stands out for me the most is specifically for, if you're a KOL for blockchain gaming, for Web3 gaming, you should be making content around the game, and it's kind of like you're a Twitch streamer. You don't really have anonymous Twitch streamers, do you? They all show their faces, they all show how they're playing, and they are legit people. And I think we're gonna get, so the Twitch streamers that didn't make it, or these streamers that didn't make it in Web2 gaming, let's call it, they are probably going to identify an opportunity in Web3 gaming, and they're going to probably think, well, this place is crowded, let's go here. And I think that would be like a good opportunity for not just for KOLs, but for projects themselves, because both the KOL and the project will grow their brands together, kind of thing, in a collaborative way. And yeah, I feel like if you're a blockchain game, you should definitely look out for these KOLs that make content and actually the KOL shows their own face in the content. So yeah, I think another question goes into like the content itself, is user generated content and how important that is. And then another question is kind of similar, related to UCG, but more towards the beta access. But like, do you feel like user generated content is important?
Yeah, like we were saying right at the beginning, I came from the e-commerce world. And if you think of what Instagram and ratings and reviews did for e-commerce, transformed the world, allowed new entrants into the market to just erupt and, really kind of jump onto the scene. I think the same is true for all user generated content. It's just can be hugely, hugely valuable to have that person talking about you unprompted, or sharing information, knowledge, content actually from the game in the case of like streamers. Yeah, I think it's invaluable because it's community building and it carries a really big weight with users. I think you can play the system a little bit and like go too far with like sponsoring streamers and all of these things who are blatantly just like sometimes doing it because they're paid to do it. And I think the organic ones are sometimes even more valuable. But generally, user-generated content, I think, is hugely valuable as a community asset, because it takes time and effort for somebody to do that thing, and it just shows that they're bought into the project, and it will inspire others to do the same. So yeah, interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think at the end of the day, it's like word of mouth marketing, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, and that's what sort of sells a lot more than you seeing an ad, for example, because it's someone you trust that tells you, hey, look, check this game out, rather than just seeing an Instagram ad or a Twitter ad.
Yeah.
This leads me to my next question is, so should you gate your beta access or should you not? For me, I feel like it depends, but for most games, I feel like you shouldn't gate your beta access, specifically because you want people to create content and you want people to share the excitement and the hype of the game. But you could also play it the other way around and say, well, if you gate it, you add like this exclusivity thing about it. But that's really, really hard to achieve, I feel like.
Yeah, I think you will know deep down in your gut whether your project has the credibility and the hype surrounding it to be able to pull off the gated approach. And if you've got it deep down and you know that there's a hunger to get your hands on what you're building, then I think there are some really smart ways that you can make it more exclusive, make those people feel even more special for having access, and you'll probably gain more from it, from having the 10,000 people do it rather than having the 100,000 people that could have if you didn't do it. You create super users through that hype and that energy. But also, if you don't feel down in your gut that your community are like really got the hunger for it, then I think that gated approach, especially if it's like a paid access, which some projects are doing now, I think that can come across as a cash grab. It can just fall flat on its face. So I think it's a really risky thing to do. I would often err on the side of caution and have it as an easier barrier to entry, like less barrier.
Yeah, I think projects that could get away with stuff like that are like Yuga Labs, for example, with they can get away with that because obviously they've built this massive reputation and brand on Web3. So yeah, but if you get like a new project, I just don't think it makes sense for you to gate your beta access, especially as I've noticed that there's an influx of Web3 game content creators that are coming in. I'm sure they would want to get access to your game, obviously, to test it out and stuff. So yeah, I think that was the last question. I like to end the podcast by asking guests what topics relating to Web3 growth we should cover next. What do you think?
Yeah, I think just because of what's happened in the last week or so in the crypto space, I think my answer to the question is probably the least sexy thing in the world, but I'm very interested and excited, kind of inquisitive about what crypto marketing will look like in a more regulated world. In my previous life, I worked in a business where we did a lot of regulated marketing in things like pharmaceutical and financial markets, like insurance and credit cards and over-the-counter pills and things like this. And I think based on what the SEC is, how is it approaching it in the US, I think we're on the cusp of moving into a world where crypto and the marketing that we do is going to be more regulated. And I think we need to be savvy enough to understand and preempt some of that and start like learning what some of the prerequisites are and some of the terminology, and just making sure that we're not treading on any toes that we shouldn't be and breaking any rules that we shouldn't be in the work we're doing today, let alone what we're going to be doing in 18 months time. So it's not very sexy to finish talking about regulation and all that crap, but I do think it's necessary. Yeah, it is. I think it's necessary for us. So yeah, maybe finish on that bombshell.
Yeah, I think I actually have the right person for it as well. So that might be my next episode, maybe. But yeah, I'll send you an article I saw from the FCA saying what we can sort of market and what we can't, which might be a good guide. But yeah, so Baz, tell me, where can we find you on socials?
Yeah, so I've got 2 Twitter accounts actually, one which is my own, Baz Pixel, and then one for the podcast, which is Decentralized Dig. And yeah, it's more or less kind of Twitter, obviously available on all good podcast platforms now, on YouTube. Managed to get approved on Apple and Spotify as well. So yeah, hopefully on a return episode, I can have you come and join us.
Awesome.
And yeah, look forward to a kind of part 2 of our discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to join the pod at some point. But yeah, thank you for coming. And yeah, and for our listeners, so we're creating a Telegram group with Web3 growth people. We've got some notable founders there and some notable Web3 growth people. Baz is one of them, as well as some people from, layer ones and some pretty big wallets like Ambar Wallet. So yeah, if you want to join the group, it's a Telegram group. So if you want to join, just send me a message. My username is ZKSteph. So yeah, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and give us a review on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to, as it really helps the show. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, and I'll see you in the next episode.